Hey guys, today we're back to tell more of the story of the Spectre in the Bronze Age. This time, his big team-up was Zatanna, mystical superhero of DC. If you aren't subscribed to Comic Island, we've been going through the entire history of the Spectre, so be sure to subscribe and check out those videos if you'd like to learn more about the character. And for those of you who have been enjoying these videos, please consider joining our channel's new membership program, which you can learn more about by clicking on this button below the video. In New York City's Greenwich Village, at a popular show hosted by acclaimed mystic Zatanna, the powerful magician began gaining fame after her show delighted crowds night after night. One evening, however, Zatanna was alarmed when a trick led to her arm disappearing. Though the crowd was amazed, assuming this was a planned trick, this was not the case, and she was unable to return her limb with the normal spell. Instead, it summoned a portal, which in turn unleashed a series of beasts, a rainstorm of blood, and monsters, all onto the suddenly terrified crowd. With the show abruptly brought to an end, Zatanna sought out her assistant Adam for help, only to find him without a head, and for him in turn to turn to dust right before her eyes. 3 weeks later, at Madame Xanadu's home in Greenwich, a desperate Zatanna stumbled in with her missing arm returned, only for the other to have vanished. Explaining what had happened, with her now experiencing strange phenomenon going through all her limbs, the powerful superhero found herself at a loss as to what happened to her. The two discussed the last time Zatanna came into proximity with the Spectre, as she and her father Zatara were both involved with the battle against the darkness. Zatara died right before Zatanna's eyes in an effort to protect her from the shadow creature's magics. In the months that followed, Zatanna was tormented by her father's voice. She also learned that her mother belonged to a race of magical humans known as Homo Magi, and through this met Adam, leading to the events that happened at the show. Xanadu recommended Zatanna seek out the aid of Jim Corrigan, living upstairs of course, and summoned the detective to her chamber. On his way downstairs, when Jim Corrigan got distracted by his girlfriend, Kim, the Spectre grew impatient, and sensing the interesting energies brewing below them, he left Corrigan's body and abruptly went ahead. Learning what had happened, the Spectre decided to seek out Zatara for himself, as he still possessed the power to communicate with the dead. Zatanna, meanwhile, suddenly had her arm return, only for her leg to disappear. The Spectre traveled into the afterlife where he encountered the mysterious being known as the Phantom Stranger. This powerful entity informed the Spectre that Zatara's spirit was not really there. Though the stranger assumed this was due to the man faking his own death, the Spectre confirmed that Zatara's body was indeed destroyed, that Zatara's soul must have been intercepted along the way into the afterlife. The Spectre agreed to look into this matter, and though the Phantom Stranger wanted to help, he had other business with a human named Bruce Gordon. It turns out this was all the work of a sorcerer named Wotan, who was trapped in the Limbo realm connected to the afterlife after he attempted to capture the Spectre and the JSA years ago in the early days before Pearl Harbor. In the present day, Wotan had devised a plan to steal Zatanna's limbs one by one and drain them of mystical energy, creating a new body he could escape to on Earth. He returned the limbs each time he drained them to better stay hidden and avoid others discovering his plan, but still was nearly found by the Spectre when the spirit searched through the realms connected to the afterlife that could have stolen Zatara's soul. Unfortunately, Wotan was able to remain hidden long enough for the Spectre to have to return to Corrigan's body. Meanwhile, on Earth, even though Pete Quarrel basically hated him, Jim managed to convince the police lieutenant to work with the private detective in looking into the missing limbs with old-fashioned police work while the Spectre was gone. They were able to trace a bizarre pattern of limbs appearing in the city along with a pair of demons who were secretly working on behalf of Wotan, and they followed a trail leading the investigators to a display at a local museum featuring an Egyptian artifact. There, the two were alarmed to discover Zatanna's missing limbs, discovering that Wotan was doing all this to construct his own new body on Earth. Conducting his magics from Limbo, Wotan then seized Zatanna's torso, appearing before the men, while back at Xanadu's home, Zatanna began hearing the voice of her father, who commanded the young woman to seize the fortune-teller's torso for herself. Clearly affected by all this magic, Zatanna began to comply, just as the Spectre returned. Wotan's demons, Wrath and Ghast, grabbed the detective and Pete, while the Spectre redirected Zatanna's attacks by possessing the knives Zatanna had summoned. Pete and Jim then managed to fight the demons off, while Wotan fled, still vulnerable as his plans were not yet complete. Meanwhile, Zatanna continued her attack, summoning more weapons until the Spectre used his own arm to sub in for her torso, at the very least stunning the woman and returning Zatanna to her senses. Wotan, Wrath, and Gas then turned their attention to their final missing piece, Zatanna's own head. Jim Corrigan returned, explaining what happened, and without a word the Spectre left, using this information to easily capture both Wrath and Gas, and retrieve Wotan's body, still under construction. With all these new resources, the Spectre was able to mystically transport himself to Wotan's exact location. The spirit was able to reinforce Wotan's prison in Limbo, but Wotan then threatened to leave Zatanna in her broken state, while he also held Zatara's soul hostage. The evil sorcerer revealed he was using Zatara to plague Zatanna with visions, having also created Adam to further her torment and manipulate her even more, all to escape from Limbo. With no other choice, the Spectre made a deal with Wotan. In exchange for safe passage to Earth, Wotan would help the sorcerer restore the magicians. So Zatara's soul was freed, Zatanna's body was restored, and Wotan was brought to Earth, though his demon minions were deliberately left behind by the Spectre in the now reinforced prison. The Spectre immediately tried to betray Wotan and attack him, but the powerful sorcerer was able to teleport himself away in a mere instant. With that, Zatanna was able to say goodbye to her father before the Spectre sent him to the afterlife proper. Later, when Jim Corrigan learned that the Spectre allowed Wotan to escape just to save 2 innocent souls, he couldn't help but wonder if he was starting to have an effect on his normally much colder and calculating spiritual partner. In an apparent response to Wotan's victory, the Spectre later approached Jim Corrigan, speaking in a very odd and disturbing tone. The ghostly being admitted he was struggling with this severe reduction in power, and concerning to Corrigan, the Spectre announced it decided it would seek out and slay murderers before they committed their crimes. Though concerned with the morality of it all, Corrigan later acknowledged to Kimmy he doesn't fully understand the power of the Spectre or the being that created him. Jim pointed out that he actually had come to prefer working as a private detective, even though nobody ever asked him if this is what he wanted. It all just sort of happened in the fallout of the crisis, almost as if reality or the presence knew this best reflected the person Corrigan had become in the wake of all those events. For a being as powerful as the Spectre, it was unlikely for him to actually be wrong about if someone was going to murder somebody, and he could very well save many lives, so Corrigan's instincts told him not to interfere. However, when the Spectre began putting this idea into practice, it began to affect Corrigan heavily. He decided to hide himself from the Spectre in response, and as they had been warned, Corrigan began wasting away without his partner, intent on finally bringing an end to the spirit for good, even if it meant his own death. The two eventually reunited, and Corrigan accused the Spectre of being as bad as the murderers he slaughters. They got in an argument about all of this, with Jim recalling an incident where he couldn't help a woman until after she was murdered, and that being a key reason as to why he no longer misses being a cop. So he could, to a degree, relate to the Spectre's perspective. But he also couldn't let go of the idea that the Spectre was messing around with the idea of free will and self-determination. And though it went unmentioned, the Spectre had been tricked many times before in the past, and could very well be manipulated into killing the wrong person. When prompted, Jim did agree with the Spectre that neither wanted to wait around for innocent people to be killed, but Jim insisted that they find real tangible proof of crimes before they act out on them. The Spectre simply insisted that at his level of power, his word was proof enough. On the verge of death, the detective felt as though this was as good of a detente as he was going to get, and decided to let the Spectre back in. This left things with the Spectre unconvinced fully by Corrigan, but he did stop rampaging through New York slaughtering would-be murderers without distinction, which Corrigan took as a victory of sorts. Yet in spite of what could vaguely be referred to as a win, Jim knew he couldn't pull off the trick again. Throughout the whole affair, Kimmy interfered to the point where she basically enabled the Spectre to return to Corrigan whether he liked it or not. And getting closer with the woman meant that he was less willing to sacrifice himself just to stop the Spectre. Meaning, if the Spectre ever got out of control, there wasn't much Corrigan was ready to do about it. So in spite of some progress, there remained a clear divide between Spectre and its host, one where, in theory, the fate of thousands hung in the balance. But we'll get more into that in the future when we cover the next major adventure for the Spectre, as he enters into an event with DC called Millennium. So stay tuned for that. I don't actually know much about that event myself, so it will be interesting. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island.